Just be content. Living a life in the shadows. And here's where the book of Ruth really comes in. And go read it if you haven't read it yet. It's only 4 chapters. I love Ruth. I love Ruth because she decides to follow her mother-in-law and leave her homeland. Now, when I started reading and studying, really studying the book of Ruth, Ruth is where the concept of just be originally came from. Let me say that. Because when Boaz actually meets Ruth, which is her future man of her dreams, her like hunk of a man that she has always dreamed of, when she actually meets him, what opens his heart to her is not her beauty or all of this. It was her testimony. It was the story of who she was behind the scenes that really opened up Boaz's heart towards Ruth. And so I believe if we're just the men or women of character God has called us to be, that doors will be opened for us and everything God's put in your heart will come to pass. So just focus on the character. And part of character is being content. Now, Ruth decided to come back to Jerusalem or Israel with Naomi. And in studying about Ruth, many believe that Orpah, which was her sister-in-law, was also her sister in real life. And get this, many of the rabbis, Jewish rabbis, that I studied believe that Ruth and Orpah were sisters of one of the Moabites, one of the kings there. So they were actually, or potentially actually, royalty. And I don't think we think about the context of the people in the Bible with all the details as much as we should. So Ruth is basically choosing to go with a widow who has no family back to the land of her homeland, where Ruth would be an enemy, considered an enemy and looked down upon, and she was a widow, and they had no one to provide for her, no one to protect them, all of that. She chose that over going back to her father's house and being in the palace. And I want you to know this. Here's what I want you to know. That choosing the path of the shadows does not necessarily mean that you are choosing God's worst for your life. You aren't. You aren't. In fact, many of the times, our character is developed in the shadow seasons. In the shadow seasons. I want to encourage you to be content if you feel like you're living a life in the shadows, meaning, I really had these hopes. Ruth had hopes and dreams. Ruth, I'm sure, wanted to be a mother. Ruth, I'm sure, wanted to have a husband who loved her and cared for her. I'm sure she wanted to bless others with her life. But right now, she found herself a widow, trying to take care of Naomi, who is also a widow, and just working hard and giving and loving. And it seemed like she was in the shadows. She could have been in the palace, but she chose to be a laborer in the field with a widow. And in those times, God developed her character so much that people looked at her and they saw not just what she did, but who she was. And that is what opened doors of favor and opportunity. And it was really a pathway for the promises of God to be done in her life. If you are in the shadows, embrace it. Embrace your season of being unknown. Embrace your years of living in the shadows. Be content in that season and ask God, develop my character here. Help me to be faithful. Help me to be honorable. God, help me to love others well. God, help my testimony, my character to be developed, because I know that you developing in me a life in the shadows, a life where not everyone's watching. God, that you are doing something supernatural in me in this season. God, don't take me to a place where my character cannot sustain the place of blessing that you've brought me to. God, help me to have boundaries in my life so that no matter where I am, God, I am fully in tune with what your will is for my life for this season. The shadows. The shadows are a beautiful place. Don't despise them. If you feel like your dreams aren't being heard, if you aren't stepping into that thing that you want to do, but embrace it and ask God, Open the doors when the doors are right. And for every minute that my foot is here, God, I pray that you would develop my character and help me to become the woman of God that you've destined me to be. And that was the path that led her to her promise. It wasn't the palace. She could have chose to go back. But it was the path that seemed the least likely that she chose. And in the end, that just was the most amazing path God had for her life. So I love you. Be content with where you're at.